All right, y'all. Day 7 of the Tory Lanez trial. And on this day, they had eyewitness Sean Kelly. It was outside of his home that all this happened. He said he woke up from the argument between Meg and Kelsey. And he said they were fighting for a while. They started arguing. Then they got into a fist fight. And he says that Kelsey was whooping on Meg, beating her down. He said Meg started kicking a lot, just kicking her feet a lot. Kelsey was just beating her up. He says that gunshots seemed to come from Kelsey's direction. And then that is when Tory got out. That's when the other guy got out, the driver got out. And Tory proceeded to wrestle with Kelsey. And then he had the gun and 2 more shots went off. Now, Sean Kelly, the witness, was a little bit confused about how many number of shots, but they had audio, so it was 3 shots that went off first, and then 2 shots after a pause. So if you would have believed the way Sean Kelly says it, then that means, since he said the gun sparked from where Kelsey was at, 3 shots from her, Tory fights for the gun, 2 shots go off. The way he says that he was shooting it wildly, at one point he says that, then another point he says Tory was shooting it in the air. So, I guess take from that what you will. I kind of think it means that Tory just wrestled for the gun, accidentally, shot 2 more times just from trying to wrestle for the gun. That's what it sounds like when you put the stories together. That's what makes the most sense. Probably one of the creepiest things, or maybe not the creepiest, but one of the most disturbing things he says, Sean Kelly says he saw, was they all start beating on Meg, just beating her down, just unmercifully, just pounding away on her, all 3 of them, Tory, Kelsey, and the driver. And then, Kelly says they all picked up Meg, and Kelly thought they were going to throw her in the lake, but they end up putting her in a car and driving off. So to me, I don't know if that, what was that from? Was Meg, they said she was real drunk. Was she still trying to fight everybody off? Was she just being unreasonable? Could it have looked like it was them hitting on her, when maybe they were just trying to grab her, get her up to put her in a car, and she was just trying to fight with them? I don't know. Like I said, that is something that the defense, I guess, could use to try to make a statement or a claim. But then you wonder, well, why didn't Meg say anything? Why didn't Meg say that she had gotten jumped? Wouldn't that be something that would benefit her story of being the victim? I know Meg is a victim, but wouldn't that be something that help benefit her story, get more sympathy, kind of, maybe explain a little bit more of what's going on? I just wouldn't understand why she would leave that part out if it's, everybody's attacking her. It would make more sense for her to say that part. And again, I got to say, Kelly he's just a guy. He doesn't know them. He has no relationship with any of them. And he's just telling you what he saw, the best of his knowledge. It was late. He just woke up. His son was there. He's concerned for his son. He's probably calling the cops, freaking out. So the story may be a little iffy at times. Sometimes he saw the gun. Sometimes he didn't see the gun. I really don't think he ever saw the gun. I think he just kept meaning he heard the gunshot and from who he believed it was coming from. Probably from just the spark of the gun he was seeing. But he said he never actually saw a physical gun. So I think I got what he was saying. He was just a little jumbled up with his language, which I can understand. Being there testifying and having to remember this thing from, over 2 years ago. So yeah, I'm just curious what comes next with that, because I don't think that prosecution has any witnesses on their end that they can have testify. But another thing that they were saying from Kelly was the prosecution was trying to ask, well, why didn't you describe the shooter, the initial shooter, that night? And Kelly said, well, they didn't ask me. And then the prosecution, they were also asking, well, why did you, when you called the police, why did you report that man was assaulting a woman and people were fighting? Why didn't you tell that there was a shooting that went on? And Kelly says, well, that's what was happening at the time of me calling, the fighting. So that's why I reported that, because that's what I was seeing as I was on the phone. When the officers came, I did report the shooting, and they went to go find the people. And again, Kelly says the reason why he did not give a description of the shooter is because nobody asked. And later on, when they came back, he did give a description of the shooter. That's on file. That's on record. I think the prosecution was trying to get at that they believe somebody from Tory's team may be intimidating Kelly, trying to force them to say something that they didn't see or whatever. But Kelly had an answer for that. They then went ahead and got the officer who took Kelly's statement. He had been on before, but they brought him back on. The prosecution did, and they were just asking about Kelly and or asking things about that night in details. And then the defense came on there and they started asking him about Kelly and did you ask Kelly to give a description of the shooter? The officer said they couldn't remember. They showed the police report. The officer was like, okay, no, I didn't. And then they got the description later and, a couple other questions. And then they went to the DNA analyst, a different one from the last time. And they're kind of asking about, DNA on the gun. Could, just because one person's DNA is strong or more dominant, the male DNA is more dominant, does that mean that they were the last person to touch it? And wouldn't the person whose gun it is, wouldn't their DNA be, on the bullets and inside of the gun? And they were asking, does being in the pool get rid of your DNA? I guess the prosecution was asking that to see if maybe that would have been why Tory Lanez's DNA they weren't able to read it as well. So yeah, it was pretty much most likely DNA would be on the gun, but there's a chance there are ways to get rid of it. You can wipe it off. Chlorine from a pool can get rid of it. But the last person's DNA, but a person with the most DNA on a weapon does not necessarily mean that they were the last person to handle the gun. And so yeah, just a bunch of nothingness. I have to say the last two witnesses really didn't, add anything. I think, Sean Kelly added the most. Again, I don't think that the prosecution really has much to go on here. I think that there is a ton of reasonable doubt. The prosecution's before they wanted to add 2 more charges on Tory for bribery. This time they're saying if Tory takes the stand, which I don't know why he would, that they want to ask him about his lyrics, his gun tattoo. They want to ask him about August Alsina. They want to ask him about a couple other just pretty much paint a negative narrative on Tory, which kind of reeks of desperation. I'm not gonna lie. The prosecution, they may have taken, no, not may have, they took on this case way too early. They literally had no evidence. One of the things the defense was asking was, and that they had asked it before, but they asked this time, was Kelsey's DNA tested? And the DNA analyst was like, no, it was not. And if Kelsey's DNA had been tested, would you have been able to determine if she had touched a gun? The DNA expert was like, well, most likely. I think that's weird that Kelsey's DNA wasn't tested. And it's weird that the prosecution didn't want to call forth the witness to what happened. And it's just really making me wonder, do they want the truth or do they just want Tory to be found guilty? Because the thing about the DA and when they go ahead to prosecute and the prosecution's in charge of trying to get a guilty plea, the reason why they're so sure is because they've gone through all the evidence, they've gone through every possibility, or in theory they're supposed to, and then based off all that, they got the person that did it. But this time it just looks like the goal wasn't to try to find out who actually did it. The goal was to try to put it on Tory, because I can't for the life of me understand why everybody wasn't tested for everything. And if you want to say Meg was the victim, okay, but Kelsey's DNA wasn't tested? Especially when you find gun residue on her, you don't test her DNA, and you have a witness that the witness that called in the police, that came and gave it, that gave a testimony that's on the police report that says that the female, they saw the gunfight from the female side and they saw the 2 females fighting, and you don't test her DNA. It seems like you already had your story and you're just trying to find any bit of evidence to support that, as opposed to just finding out what really happened and just wanting to get the truth. And I don't know if because Meg said it was him, so they felt like they only could go after him. But that's something to take into consideration. And maybe, yeah, that's the main thing you go off of. It's Tory because Meg said it. But that doesn't mean you just ignore everything else and only bring witnesses or only try to get people to come and testify that tells this story. You get the correct story, you get all this information, and then you get the people to come in. But it just seems like they only want one side to be known. They only want one person to possibly have been able to do this. We're at that point now, but it seemed like that before we even got to trial. They only wanted it to be Tory. They never wanted it to be anybody else. And now it's coming back to haunt them because this is a very weak case. And Meg's contradicting Tory, contradicting Kelsey, contradicting EJ, contradicting Sean Kelsey. And EJ's not contradicting Sean Kelsey because he wasn't there at that point. But I'm just saying all these testimonies are contradicting, and the prosecution is going to have to explain why their opening statements just seem so fuzzy now. Why none of this makes any sense. Why they didn't investigate to the fullest extent. Why anything that doesn't have to do with Tory, nobody seems to remember from the prosecution side. Why Tory was tested for everything, but there were other people in the car, and DNA was not tested on Kelsey, and she had gun residue on her. This has to be explained, and this is ridiculous, but we're going to continue on. Judge is hoping that this finishes before Christmas. Honestly, I am too. There's really nothing that, unless there's some smoking gun that prosecution has, or they can find Meg's bodyguard.
It's the WACCast podcast. Yeah.
Talk whack to me. Talk whack to me.
Yeah.
Talk whack to me. Talk whack
It's
to me.
the WACCast podcast. Yeah.
Talk whack to me. Talk whack to me.
Yeah.
Talk whack to me. Talk whack to me.